Welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton, and today's guest is Rachel Redmond speaking on the Yin Way. For the past 20 years, Rachel Redmond has been on a personal and professional journey studying ancient Eastern medical traditions. As a doctor of Oriental medicine and Ayurvedic practitioner, Rachel specializes in women's health and self-care. Rachel believes that self-care doesn't need to be stressful or something extra on your to-do list. She's on a mission to help every woman she meets learn how to simplify their self-care so they can feel 10 times better and live a productive and fulfilling life. In her flagship program, The Yin Way, she teaches the foundational principles every woman needs to know, but often has never been taught in order to experience sustainable self-care, inner peace, and radiant health. For more information, check out our website at rachel-redmond.com or Instagram at Rachel E. Redmond. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm thrilled and really interested and intrigued to learn more about your program, The Yin Way, that really focuses on self-care for women, especially for moms. And that's a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And then I preach on almost every single episode on Well-Adjusted Mama. Because I just think as women, we need that gentle reminder on a regular basis. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about, like, start from the beginning and let's talk about, as women, how do we get to a place where we it's easy for us to get depleted by overgiving.
Yeah, I love to talk about that. And so as part of my background as an acupuncturist and a doctor of Oriental medicine, I see everything, the world, through the paradigm of yin and yang. So that's my starting place for explaining this to my clients or even to my friends and understanding it for myself, is that when you think of it, we live in a world that prioritizes and values all the things associated with yang energy. So that's things like being active and extroverted and kind of busy and quick and in motion. And all of that is well and good. But what's happened is that we've put so much kind of priority on that, on being productive. And then we've done that at the expense of what's associated with the yin, which is more like rest and stillness and slowness and introversion and reflecting inward and things like that. So yin and yang are equal. They are interdependent. They are necessary for balance for each other. And we are in a world that really just prioritizes the yang and devalues the yin. So that's kind of the water that we swim in, where the world that we live in. And so we're kind of always in motion and always trying to get the next goal. And almost like, we just feel like we always have someplace to go, and there's this busyness, and it's sort of like a status symbol. So that's really the place I start to say, like, first of all, look at our context. It's like, no wonder we're feeling, imbalanced. No wonder we're depleted. No wonder, like, it's so hard to, find that work-life balance.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think, I would say, like, just from a personal perspective, I grew up, that hard work was valued, it was honored, it was acknowledged, and certainly, like, lazy behavior, quote unquote, was shameful, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it's interesting because it's great to have a great work ethic and to have that drive and passion and take action, right? And all these yang ways of living. But they do need to be balanced. And I think that's really what we're hearing here is this homeostasis. It's too much of either is not healthy. And so especially as women and moms, where we have such busy schedules, it seems like, and we have so much to do, not only for ourselves, but for everyone around us, our spouses and our children. How do we create more yin in our lives?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with first noticing that, like, noticing your life and looking at the ways in which you're putting out a lot of that yang energy. Sometimes I'll even ask my clients to make a list, like just draw, a line down the center of the page. On the left side, write yin, on the right side, write yang, and just list off, like, what are your to-dos? What are all of the actions you're taking in your life? And then on the other side, on the yin side, what are all the ways in which you're restoring your energy, restoring your body, nourishing yourself? And people can start to get a visual there that there's that imbalance. And so then it's taking a deeper look and saying, what are the things that really fill up my cup? What are the things? Because, for some people, everyone gets filled up differently. So we have to start looking at what are those things and then really valuing them, then really seeing them as productive, sort of expanding our definition of productivity to include things like meditation and rest and stillness. And what often comes up is guilt, of course, because we've sort of internalized those messages of like, you can't be lazy, you got to work to prove yourself, and all these things. So it's really this kind of unpacking, this self-awareness, that is a really good place to start, and to notice where you already have those yin energy, those yin activities, and then what are some easy ways that you could do more of that. So that's the place I start.
That sounds awesome. I mean, I think that I would love to sit down and make that list because, I think we will also, like, let's just talk about like where that list is even coming from, right? So there's these expectations that we put on ourselves that we have to do this, and this, right? And there's this, level, if we don't do everything on our list, then we failed, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think that what I love about this past year with COVID is, for me, when my schedule got cleared out of my control with the quarantine, when I began to add things back into my schedule, it was much more deliberate and intentional and conscious, instead of like, well, I've been doing this for years, so let me just keep doing this. Like, I do this every week, right? So like, that's what I keep doing. And rather than really saying, well, does this bring me joy? Is this beneficial? Is this a good use of my time? Right. So I think that was really such a blessing that came out of the quarantine. And then once again, looking at that list and being like, for me, I love to delegate if possible, right? So sometimes you can look at that list and there are action steps that might need to get done to run your household, but where can you delegate?
Right, exactly. And really combing through that list, seeing like, oh, do I have to do all these things? Do I have to bake the cupcakes and, show up for all the, meetings and this and that? Like, are there some things I can, filter out? And I think it comes down to somewhat of managing our expectations for ourselves, for our, as parents, as mothers, just so much of it really is that kind of self-reflection, I think, can be so powerful because we don't always take the time to, turn inward and see how things are working, like what's working, what's not working. And just taking that time I really like to help my clients think about self-care is like stress-free and sustainable. So I'm not one to give them more on their to-do list. And I think that, like if self-care is on the yang side on that to-do list, then it's not working for us because it's just probably creating more stress. And that's, not the point. So yeah, just looking, sort of lost my train of thought there. But anyway, I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. So, when you make that list, then you get to actually go through it and be like, do I want to continue doing these things? And the other thing I realized when I did a time management program with Tony Robbins years ago is like activities that feel urgent but actually aren't, or things that feel like important but actually aren't. Like checking social media, every hour. So I think, and sometimes that maybe doesn't make it on the list, right? But I mean, even something like that would be considered a yang activity. Maybe you can kind of break down what activities are yang and what activities are yin.
Yeah. So in my mind, anything that requires energy. So I'll kind of break it down into the self-care paradigm, because I break down self-care in the yin and yang, this internal self-care and external self-care. So I think it'll really help to see what I'm talking about. So I see external self-care on the yang side as anything that takes time, money, resources, planning. It's just energy to, get a massage, do like plan a girls' night or whatever it is. So we need all of that stuff. There's no good or bad, but those are the kind of activities like going to a yoga class, in terms of self-care. But then on the other hand, we have internal self-care. So that's anything that is easy, effortless, and requires no time and planning. And so that is really centered on a mindfulness practice and really realizing that any moment can be a moment of self-care. And so, for instance, like even if you're sitting in traffic, you can be like clutching the steering wheel and like tensing up in your body and just feeling so frustrated and like rushed to get somewhere. Or it can be a moment of self-care by just noticing how you're feeling, loosening the grip on the steering wheel, taking 3 to 5 deep breaths, and turning that moment in one that was like this energy feeling dispersed everywhere to turning it back inward and really recharging and reflowing your energy, your chi, the life force. And so that's an example that of yin, of this like internal self-care, that we can turn anything into self-care. And, as a mom, there's a lot of parts of the day. I have a 3.5-year-old. And so there's a lot of moments of my day that feel very like young, like just busy, just up and down the stairs, doing all those things. But then in those moments that I'm really just get down on the floor with my kid and I'm just not thinking about anything else and super present with him and just, like making that eye contact, it's like total yin self-care. So it doesn't require anything. It just requires our attention and our intention to kind of, shift into that kind of downshift a little bit.
That's amazing. I have a 3.5-year-old as well.
Oh, you
and
do?
and it's busy, it's very busy. And like, for example, this morning, like, he didn't want to get dressed for school. He didn't, there was all this stuff going on and it's hard. And it gets so, the patience is really required to not be like, okay, we just got to get this done and get out of here. Right. Which is also very young. So, I think that, children are such a gift and also requiring us to slow down, right? We can't rush through things because they just won't let us, especially a toddler who's like, we were counting out 10 spoons this morning and I could have done it in a lot less time if it was by myself, but he had to do it himself and he had to put all the spoons in the bag and we had to count them a couple times. So anyways, like it's really interesting. So what we're talking about is really that patience that, when as a mom, when I'm experiencing that, instead of being in that headspace of, oh, I just got to get this done and move on to the next task, how can I be really connected and mindful with my son at that moment? And that's that literal shift. It's the same activity, but it's that shift from yang to yin that's happening internally. That's what I'm hearing from you, right?
Yeah. And I've noticed that, as becoming a parent, is that one of the hardest things for me is having to shift from going, 100 miles an hour, trying to like do all the things and multitask, to then going to like 10 miles an hour when my, like kid wanting to count out spoons. And so it's like having to make that jump all the time can be quite stressful and frustrating. And so it's like bringing that attention to that is what's going on, and moving more seamlessly between the yin and the yang can be a way to lower stress, because everything that I'm about, really, that I help my clients with is trying to help them reduce stress, remove stress, or better cope with it. Because in my mind, self-care is the antidote to stress. So if our self-care is causing us stress, then like, forget about it. Like, just don't even worry about it. And so I'm trying to turn different, daily life moments into self-care, just to, keep us going, keep us replenished, and keep us, we want that energy for the young. We want to be active and productive and have fulfilling careers. But I see that we need that yin to support that energy.
Yeah. And I do really appreciate how you're talking about just this really quite subtle shift in our intention that doesn't cost a single penny.
Mhm.
Self-care, certainly there are activities I like to spend money on, like getting
Right.
facials and massages, acupuncture adjustments, all of that. But,
Mhm.
and that is part of my self-care, and that's external. But then there's this a whole other part of internal self-care that is, uh, is available to me at any time.
Exactly.
Um,
And I think this past, year plus with the pandemic is, especially in the beginning, so much of our external self-care was stripped away. We couldn't go for acupuncture adjustments, massages. So then it really became like, okay, well, what can I do? How can I take care of myself? Because now I need it more than ever before, and I don't have access to half the things that I had access to before.
mhm. So, as we're talking about this internal self-care, and we're talking, this conversation is really geared towards women and moms. How is this also going to impact our intimate relationships? I don't know if you go into that at all in the yin way, but certainly I'm hearing like we're really stepping into our feminine and
Mhm.
owning that, and how that is going to impact, if we're in a relationship with a man, how that's going to impact our relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's, I mean, of course it's going to be individual, but I think that, what comes to mind is when we're feeling stretched, and pulled in so many directions, it can be hard then to, foster those intimate connections with a partner, because it's like, oh, at the end of the day, and I hear this a lot from moms, is like, I don't want anybody else. I just want to be, with myself, with my own thoughts, to have alone time. And so it's almost like we run out of time and space for our intimate relationships. And obviously that can have, long-term impacts on, ourselves, our sense of, intimacy and connection. And so I'm go back to, the thing, when we take care of ourselves, we can take care of everybody else. And so we have to put ourselves first. And that can help us to approach our relationships from a more grounded way, from a more responsive, not so reactive way. So when we're so stressed out, so depleted, we operate from our fear brain, the primitive brain that causes us to lash out and react and, pick fights and be mad and irritable. And when we just can have a little bit more space and, know that we can shift from that fear reactive brain to our higher mind, our prefrontal cortex, in just a couple of seconds, then we can, sometimes we just have to give the benefit of the doubt, to our partner, or there was a misunderstanding, or there is a challenge that really needs to be talked through, but it needs to be done so in a way where we have all of our faculties, like our whole brain functioning, versus just those kind of hurt places or the fear places. So I think, this is, has really implications for all of our, ourselves, our relationships with our spouses, our kids, the community and beyond, really.
Yeah, family members, our work life, our communication with at work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right.
I think that would be a really interesting conversation. Do you go into women that are working about with the Yin Way of how it impacts their career?
Yeah. So a lot of women in the yin way do have professional careers. And so they find that they're able to start to set better boundaries for themselves.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah. Yeah, and also, like, one client I had, she said, she was between meetings, and she took those 20 minutes between meetings to, the weather turned nice, to go outside and sit in the sun and relax and take a few deep breaths, versus just keeping, to plow on through. And then she was able to be more present at the meeting, probably, higher operational. And so it's really, people are starting to notice, okay, when I take 5 or 10 minutes, in a transition, in a space where I could just write emails and respond to things, they tend to, get to the end of the day and they don't feel so depleted. And potentially they're also being more productive and having a better, output at work. So it's really, this win-win scenario, but we do have to downshift a little bit. We do have to like reorient our perspective because we feel like we need to be plowing through our days. And I'm, trying to help people say like, well, we can take micro breaks. We can take mini breaks, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And then we get to the end of our day and we don't have to do those numbing out behaviors like binge watching TV or drinking a bunch of wine or, what, like all those things that we, people do at the end of the day because they just can't handle anymore.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
It's so true. Yeah, I mean, this sounds really valuable. I definitely, and I think this is also something that I really see so much more with women than with men. And I once again, I think it has to go back with our culture and the way we were raised as girls,
Mhm.
but that the boundary issue, like I see my husband has no problems with boundaries. Like
Uh-huh.
he will just tell you to your face, and not necessarily me, but to anyone, like if you've crossed the line, right?
Mhm.
And that type of confrontation is uncomfortable for me. And I
Mhm.
really appreciate though how he's modeled, that I can speak up for myself in a pleasant way, right? But just
Mhm.
really being firm. What this is my boundary, and I'm sticking to it. And that's it. Like I just think that's just so important, and it's something. I have a son, so and I don't have a little girl that I'm raising, but I want him to also learn that women have boundaries, and as do men, right? And
Right.
how it's important for us to, what are we teaching our next generation,
Right.
of how to communicate with each other and be empathetic. But also, I think that's the key here is understanding that empathy does not mean that you are a doormat, right?
Right.
And
Right.
there's that. And then so you can be really caring and compassionate and also really protective, like fiercely protective of your boundaries and understanding number one, like what are my boundaries? I think that
Mhm.
sometimes isn't even clear. And so first being clear on that and then sticking to it.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think so often when we set a boundary, sometimes there's that guilt that comes up because we just have this long line, this long history of conditioning of what a woman's place is, and what she's allowed to do, and this, goes back thousands of years. So it's no wonder that this is a struggle for us. But I think now we have so much more awareness about it, and there's just such a strive for equality in relationships and things like that. So the more that we can put those boundaries in place and hold them, the more we are modeling that to our sons. That I think that I think that's just really positive all around.
Right. Or daughters, if we have daughters
Yeah,
as
exactly.
well, and
Yeah.
just showing them, this is what a healthy this is what a healthy adult looks like. This is how a healthy adult lives their life, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's just really exciting for me, of like how we can do things differently than the way we were shown.
Hmm.
Um, we can actually break some of these really, like you said, really, really long standing, multi-generational patterns,
Hmm.
all from all different cultures, right? Like,
Right.
I think that's what's cool, at least with the US, is like there's people that have, backgrounds from all over the world. And in general, though, it does seem that a lot of them were still very, had certain roles for women, right, that were
Hmm.
restricting, and
Right.
more so from some places than others. But regardless, like, okay, my grandmother had a certain life, and my mother, and my great grandmother, and what can I do now as a mom that's
Right.
different? And
Hmm.
it's going to be weird, right? Because we're
Right.
we're expecting to do things a certain way. We might even get some pushback from family members when we operate in a different manner. As a mom of a toddler, I know how frustrating it can be when the sun is shining in my child's eyes. We're driving down the road and there's nothing I can do to protect him. I'm just praying that I'm going to be driving by some tree coverage so to help, shield that sun from his eyes. And that's why I was so excited to find this product from Baby Trend called Cover Me 4-in-1 Convertible Car Seat. This car seat is amazing. It comes with a innovative and patent pending integrative canopy that offers height adjustability, ratcheting coverage, and side sun protection to literally create an umbrella and shield that sun from my son's eyes, which is amazing. It's also so cool that this car seat can literally be used from newborn all the way through 100 pounds, which is phenomenal. It just makes the life easier for parents and child. To check it out, go to babytrend.com/OSSA, OSSA, and use the code COVERME20 for 20% off. So what happens when you are living more from a yin way and that's uncomfortable for people around you?
So yeah, that discomfort definitely arises in partners and friends, and even some of it's kind of like distrust, like, well, what are you doing and why is that important, and all of these things. So that's something that we do talk about as a group. The people in the program, we have group calls, and so we'll, these things will come up, and we'll say, okay, well, how are you holding space for that? How are you, how can you communicate to your partner like why this is important? Because oftentimes it's like, as women, we know there's value in self-care. We know it's important to sleep and to rest, but the people around us don't know that and they don't support that. So it becomes this almost like teaching to them, okay, and it's experimentation. Like when they see, as, we incorporate more self-care and shifting our pace of life a little bit. Not that we still can't do a whole lot and have fulfilling careers. We can absolutely do that, but it's just, there's a subtle shift in there. And so we kind of start teaching them. And then through time, they see, wow, well, you're a lot more pleasant to be around when you're doing these things, or you're a lot less reactive. And so think it's just going to be passed down, through time and experience.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about your online program, the Yin Way, and kind of how it works and, what women are getting out of it?
Yeah, so I'd love to. So I, as an acupuncturist, and I also have a background in Ayurveda. I worked with women for about 10 years. And I just started to see, people were coming with the same run-of-the-mill symptoms. And you probably see a lot of this too. Like
I do.
Fatigue, exhaustion, insomnia, PMS, like just mood swings and pain, hormonal imbalances, and digestive issues. That was kind of like the run of the mill that I was seeing, the basic, everyone had their extra variation, but I, was thinking, okay, well, if, and I kept saying the same thing over and over to my clients, we have to look at your lifestyle. Are you sitting down to eat lunch? Like, do you sit down to eat your meals? Do you chew your food? And it's really this almost going back to the basics. But for a lot of people, they don't know how to incorporate basic things like getting enough sleep, having, a decent bedtime, kind of syncing their lifestyles with the circadian rhythms that can be really, really important for, brain health, hormonal health, energy, digestive health, all these things. So the Yin Way program is really like me pulling from, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda medicine, the most foundational principles that I feel that all women in their, menstruating years need to know. And when they can have support and accountability to incorporate practices, like they're simple things too. It's like, eating, sitting down for meals. Like, a lot of people just push through lunch and they'll just grab a coffee or a power bar or something and then wonder why they're crashing and exhausted at the end of the day. So we're sort of doing all the things that feel like swimming upstream, like in terms of our culture, but we're prioritizing them and normalizing them. So we talk a lot about the menstrual cycle and the different phases of the cycle and what kind of self-care to do at the different phases of the cycle, what kind of exercise would be beneficial, when to push a little bit harder in your, work or your life, and when you need to sort of like pull back the reins and sort of lower your expectations a little bit. So it's this, so it's a really wonderful program helping women start to kind of take back control a little bit and see that it's not actually that hard. We just haven't been taught these basic things, and we haven't been taught that they're important and necessary.
Yes, I really appreciate what you said about really honoring our menstrual cycle, and adapting our life to where we're at in our cycle, whether it's our exercise routine, our work schedule, our social schedule. I remember I heard that concept the first time when I was in chiropractic school. One of our female professors, who had been a practicing chiropractor, mentioned that to 50% of my class was women, and I remember hearing it and being like, "Oh, why would I do that?" Like that was my initial reaction, was of disgust and like, "Oh," because it felt what my reaction. And this is like in my early 20s, right? My reaction was like, oh, that means I'm the weaker sex, right? Because that half of the audience here in this classroom you're not speaking to, and they're able to continue to live their lives the way they want to, which felt very free and empowering. And you're telling me I have to slow down. I'm like, I didn't like that. Right. Yeah. And now, now I'm like almost 20 years later, and I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I really wish I had honored that information when I heard it in my early 20s, because it was years and years of dysmenorrhea and painful periods and pushing through fatigue and all of that, right?
Right.
To get to this place now in my life where I'm older and wiser, and I'm like, oh yeah, actually those symptoms were all because of how I lived an imbalanced lifestyle.
Right. Right, exactly. And realizing that it's not like we're not like a weaker sex for doing that. Actually, there's so much power in honoring those cycles and to connecting with them, because we can, there's certain times we have more access to our intuition, and this is such a common one, that women will feel, everything's fine throughout the month. And then right before they get their period, like the same relationship issue comes up, the same thing. And they just can think, okay, well, this only surfaces, this 2 or 3 days a month. I'm just going to push past it. And, but actually that's such key information. And we have to learn to trust that information and know that that information is arising actually because estrogen and serotonin are on the decline. And so we don't have as much buffer. We don't have as much, ability to, see the bright side of things. And that's not a bad thing. That actually can be so powerful. And when we pay attention to those messages, those can guide our lives and help us to make choices that are going to be more aligned with our purpose, our dreams, our health, and just our well-being in general. So yeah, people love the module on the hormones, and I love talking about and sharing it and showing, how, our neurochemicals like serotonin are linked to our hormones and what that means and how we can better navigate, some of those times that are more of a struggle. So yeah, really important information.
So important. And I also really appreciate how you mentioned how our intuition can also be connected to our cycle, and to really go deep and meditative and really hear and listen to our intuition. It requires us being in the yin, right? Like it really is. That's where we're getting the most information, and it's the biggest gift. And it is, and it's something that I think it's really awesome to be able to honor that. And when we are pushing through and overscheduled and busy, then we're going to miss a lot of that information. And, that information is about making our life, more ease and grace, right? Like, and I just think like we're all kind of wanting more ease and grace in our life, and And we can choose to accept that if we just listen a little bit quieter and have, even like that 20 minutes a day, right? To just be still with ourselves, and get the download. And then maybe, so like with the menstrual cycle, is it the week before we start menstruating, or is it the week of our period that we are going to get the...
It's kind of both. So I kind of connect it with the lowest levels of serotonin and estrogen. So that would be the week before and then the week of the period. So
Got it. Like week 4 and week 1.
Yeah. From week 4, we see that as the yang part of the cycle. And then week 1, starting the first day of your period, is this transition to the yin. And any transition of yin to yang can go awry. And so the more that we honor those cycles and that energy that's being called of us, the more seamless we can navigate and really, even reduce menstrual pain and irritability and headaches and a lot of those things that I also used to suffer with for many, many years.
Yeah. And they're quite common, actually. And, a quick fix would be for a woman to go on the birth control pill. And there's just so much research out there showing how hazardous that is to our overall physical and mental health to be on synthetic hormones for a prolonged period of time. And they're masking, the symptoms, but they're not addressing the underlying root cause. And so root cause, we talk about these hormonal imbalances, but also like what's causing the hormonal imbalances, right?
Right.
And there could be like, medical condition like PCOS,
right?
But there also could be this imbalanced lifestyle, like we're talking about today, that is creating these hormonal imbalances. So I think that's really exciting for women. So essentially your program is for women that are, I don't know, like 20 to 45 or...
Yeah. Basically like 20s to mid 40s or, actually, it could be through the menopause transition. And a lot of them are moms. But what I find is for the women who are not moms, but want to become moms, the program is so helpful because like whatever you haven't really figured out about taking care of yourself before you become a mother, it just gets so exacerbated because, the just demands are higher, the time is less, the stress is high. So I find that, the moms really, a lot of moms come to me after a couple of kids and they've just lost connection to themselves. They're just totally depleted. And so they kind of have to climb out of a hole a little bit and take some time, but they're able to do it. And then other women, they, without children, they are able to just set the foundations before they even go down that path so that they can have, an easier transition. And I had these foundations in place before I had my son. But I had to remind myself like what was happening when he was little. And that was really kind of where the yin way came from, because I was like, oh my gosh, like I have 1,000 to-dos now. Self-care is essential to my mental health. And how am I going to do all this? And that's when I started to realize, okay, I don't need to do more. It's not about putting more on my to-do list and like getting that workout in every day and this and that. It's about how can I take the pressure off? How can I reframe and shift the perspective? And then a lot of it, how can I be kind and compassionate to myself? And just, self-compassion is so, so important. And
yes.
And that can lower the stress. We can have such a high level of perceived stress, even if our life looks great and everything's working out, but we can just be barreling through with this, so much stress. So that's, high levels of stress are going to impact the hormones. And so that's really important to really manage that as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is brilliant. I love this information. And I also really appreciate you mentioning working with women who are not yet moms, because to me, I have a program, Brayton Birth Method, that's all about preparing for pregnancy. It's preconception, holistic. It's ideal 6 months before you actively start trying to conceive. And, this is about working on yourself, doing this really deep type of self-exploration, self-love, all of these things that we're talking about in preparing ourselves as women to become mothers. The more prepared we are physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I think we're going to be able to show up more and have more of an empowered pregnancy, birth, and motherhood
Mm-hmm.
by doing that work prior to the pregnancy. I mean, obviously things will happen. We'll learn and grow as we go along, right? Even after the
Right.
baby's born, for sure. But that type of work is so valuable, and it is really it's creating these new habits, right? You're talking
Mm-hmm.
about these lifestyle shifts, and it's much easier to do that when you're not feeling like the overwhelm of taking care of a newborn or
Right.
and everything
Exactly.
else that goes along with becoming a mother.
Yes. And that's so much of like what I cover with people is, we all have habits and our habits can be harmful or helpful. And oftentimes we don't know that our habits are harmful because we just don't notice, the ripple effect that they're having, or we haven't been taught what more helpful habits would be like. And so that can be so important because it takes energy to shift a habit. It's not necessarily easy, but once we're able to do it, then, we go on default mode again and it's our habit. So, I have a habit of waking up and meditating for 20 minutes. I've done it since I was 19. So it's not hard for me. It doesn't always happen every day, now that I have a kid, but like first thing in the morning, but it is a habit. So for me, that's, stress-free self-care. Like I don't have to
Right.
think about it. It's
It's
just freshly.
non-negotiable. And I
Right.
think that's the other thing. When you're creating new healthy habits, there's a little bit of stress that goes into it when it's new and it's
Right.
unfamiliar. And it requires that commitment and also forgiveness if you skip a day, right? And you get back
Right.
up on the horse. But until it really is ingrained into your nervous system, there's that learning curve that just
Hmm.
creates a little bit more conscious effort. So
Yeah.
the more that you can do that, even like during the pregnancy, for example, if you're a first time pregnant mom, and you can start creating these types of habits before the baby's born,
Right.
it's going to be beneficial.
Right. And then so one thing I just want to add is when you're, shifting those habits is like doing those in communities of people can be so helpful. And have you heard of the term the tend and befriend, that like stress buffering response? So I love to bring this in as well because, especially when we're talking about self-care, a lot of women, we have a tendency to if we're feeling stressed or we need to like vent a little bit, we can call a girlfriend and tell them how we're feeling, and they can whatever, and it feels better. It's like a little stress download.
Yeah.
So that has been scientifically proven to be a way that women, kind of an adaptive and an evolutionary way that women have adapted to manage stress. Because, going way back, if, we all have that fight or flight in us, but, if women, back in primitive times were to if there was a threat and they fought it or ran away from it, then the vulnerable, the young, would have been unprotected and they probably wouldn't have survived. And so women had to have a different adaptive mechanism. So they would come together and tend to each other, take care of each other, and be taken care of. And that is a really, really powerful way we buffer our stress. We lower cortisol and increase oxytocin. And so I really try to bring that into everything I do, saying like, actually, when we just come together and connect and enjoy and help each other out and support and nourish, because we all kind of like to maybe like share our take on what if someone has wants some help or some advice, we can feel empowered, what's worked for us or what we've learned. So I'm really trying to create spaces where that tend to befriend stress reducing mechanism is really at the core of everything we do. So just to add that we can really have fun with self-care and really have it be stress-free and sustainable. And so I just think that's really important because I know for moms, we can be so overloaded and feel like, yeah, this all sounds nice, but like I don't have the time, or I'm so depleted. So navigating those ways that are really just kind of natural to us and just starting to emphasize those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think that is like, for example, in my community, there's a couple new moms groups for women who've just given birth. And I think it's so important as women to join and connect, especially with
Mm-hmm.
women that are going through the same life, major life event that you are, right? Like giving birth or getting married or whatever. So, connecting with these other women and sharing and learning from each other and providing that emotional support. Yeah, as women, we I think that's what's so cool with the feminine. Like we can just share and we don't need to be fixed, right? We don't need you
Right.
to respond with a solution like a
Right.
man perhaps does.
Yeah.
We just need to vent and get it out and cry and scream and yell and whatever we need to do to emote that pent up energy within us, and getting that out amongst women that we feel safe around is very deeply healing. Yeah. And when we just hold it in, it will create dis-ease within our body if we don't emote it.
Yes, I completely agree and think that's so important. I love that you have those spaces for women, especially new moms, to connect. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, a lot of them had to shift to virtual the past year, but I think hopefully soon they'll be back in person. But even virtually, weekly, like the local hospital, it's led by a lactation consultant, and it's just a place where women can come on, and connect and just talk about maybe any current challenges going on, and feel heard and seen. Right? Yeah. I think that's so important.
I love that. And then if you have a really screaming baby that day, you can just mute yourself, but still get to be at the meeting.
Yes, exactly. In the past, you'd have to walk out of the room.
Yeah, exactly. That's the benefit of Zoom. I would have loved that when I had a screaming baby.
Oh my gosh. Well, Rachel, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I just like to say that, a lot of these, a lot of this is deconditioning, and things like feeling guilty for resting and, just, feeling like you have to be productive at all costs, and just reminding people that this is not, we're trying to be healthy, but we're living in a context that's unhealthy. So if we feel like it's hard or we're not doing it good enough, then we can actually just do it a different way, in a more nourishing way, in a more feminine way, and, seek out spaces that are, supportive and open to those ideas, and not really, just sort of rejecting that status quo that's keeping us overwhelmed and exhausted. Like we can just get rid of that. I'm just no more. Like we can just do it differently.
And how exciting for the women around us, friends, sisters, and the women in our community to have us be a model for this, right? And setting an example of what's possible for women and moms to fully feel alive and feel joyful and not continue this cultural conditioning of stress and overwhelm and guilt.
I know. Wouldn't that be amazing to have the next generation of moms be like, oh yeah, not to have to face all that guilt and all those, I mean, I just think that would be so freeing and so healthy for our society.
It really would be. And I do feel like we've come a long ways. I certainly think my life has evolved beyond where my mother and grandmother were in their roles as mothers, but I also see that there's room for more growth.
Yeah. Always room for more healing, right?
Yes, definitely.
Always go deeper. Yes.
Well, thank you once again for coming on. I really appreciated our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here.
I hope you enjoyed this episode that was really all about talking about being in the feminine as a woman who's feminine at her core. And I am happy to report that I've been consciously implementing the yin way as much as possible into my own life so that I can feel more balance and really feel more at ease and grace with not constantly having to be productive, so to speak, and take action. So I hope that was a takeaway that you received as well from this episode. And as a reminder, if you're considering getting pregnant in the next few months or have a friend who's interested in getting pregnant in the next few months, please check out my holistic preconception program online at drlaurabrayton.com to learn how you can support yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually in preparing for motherhood.